Stanislav Petrov, the man who saved the world. 1983. On September 26, 1983, Stanislav Petrov was the duty officer at a Soviet nuclear early warning center. Suddenly, the computers reported that the United States had launched 5 nuclear missiles. According to protocol, Petrov should have reported this to his superiors, which would have led to a massive Soviet counterattack. However, Petrov had a gut feeling it was a mistake. He reasoned that if the US were to start a nuclear war, they would use hundreds of missiles, not just 5. He decided to report it as a false alarm. He was right. It was later discovered that the Soviet satellite system had mistaken the reflection of sunlight off clouds for missile launches. Petrov's decision alone prevented a full-scale nuclear war. Vasily Arkhipov, the Cuban Missile Crisis. 1962. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine B-59 was hiding deep in the Atlantic. The U.S. Navy began dropping non-lethal depth charges to force the submarine to surface. The crew had no communication with Moscow and thought World War III had already started. The captain and the political officer both wanted to launch a nuclear torpedo at the U.S. fleet. To do this, they needed the agreement of all 3 senior officers on board. Vasily Arkhipov was the 3rd officer, and he refused to give his permission. He argued that the U.S. was signaling, not attacking. After a heated argument, he convinced the captain to surface and wait for orders. His refusal prevented a nuclear exchange between the superpowers. The 1979 NOR-80 computer glitch. On November 9, 1979, computers at the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, suddenly showed a massive Soviet nuclear strike involving over 2,000 missiles. The U.S. military immediately prepared for retaliation. Interceptor jets were scrambled, and the president's Doomsday plane took off. Checkups were performed at other radar stations, but they showed no missiles. After 6 minutes of intense panic, officials realized that a technician had accidentally loaded a training simulation tape into the live computer system. The system was showing a game, but the military thought it was reality. The Goldsboro B-52 crashed 1961. On January 24, 1961, a B-52 bomber carrying 2 Mark 39 hydrogen bombs broke apart in midair over Goldsboro, North Carolina. As the plane disintegrated, the 2 nuclear bombs fell to the ground. One bomb's parachute deployed, and it landed intact. When experts examined it, they were horrified to find that 3 out of the 4 safety switches, designed to prevent a nuclear explosion, had failed. Only one simple low-voltage switch prevented a 4-megaton explosion on U.S. soil. If it had detonated, it would have been 250 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb, changing the East Coast forever. The 1995 Norwegian rocket incident. On January 25, 1995, a team of Norwegian and American scientists launched a rocket to study the Northern Lights. They had notified Russia about the launch, but the message was never passed to the right military officials. Russian radar detected the rocket and mistook it for a nuclear missile launched from a U.S. submarine. Russian President Boris Yeltsin was alerted, and for the first time in history, the nuclear briefcase, Chegit, was activated. Yeltsin had only minutes to decide whether to launch a counterstrike. Fortunately, Russian observers watched the rocket's path and saw it heading away from Russian territory. The alert was cancelled just before a nuclear strike was ordered. The 1960 Morristown radar alarm. On October 5, 1960, a newly installed early warning radar in Greenland reported that dozens of Soviet missiles were heading toward the United States with a 99.9% certainty. The U.S. military went to the highest level of alert. The timing felt wrong to the officials. They soon discovered that the radar was actually picking up the moon rising over Norway. The computer had not been programmed to recognize the moon as a natural object, so it interpreted the large radar reflection as a massive fleet of incoming missiles. The Damascus Titan II explosion 1980 in a missile silo in Damascus, Arkansas. A technician dropped a heavy socket while performing maintenance on a Titan II missile. The socket fell 80 feet, hit the missile, and punctured the fuel tank. Highly toxic and explosive fuel began to leak. The entire complex was evacuated, but hours later, the fuel exploded, blowing the 740-ton silo door into the air. The 9-megaton nuclear warhead, the most powerful in the U.S. arsenal, was thrown 100 feet into a nearby field. Miraculously, the warhead's safety features worked, and there was no nuclear explosion or radiation leak. The 1962 incident, Black Saturday, at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, a U.S. spy plane piloted by Rudolf Anderson was shot down over Cuba by a Soviet surface-to-air missile. This happened without direct orders from Moscow. A local Soviet commander made the decision. President Kennedy had previously promised to attack Cuba if a U.S. plane was shot down. The world waited for the U.S. to invade, which would have triggered a Soviet nuclear response. Instead, Kennedy chose to continue negotiations, ignoring the advice of his generals who wanted immediate war. This restraint saved the world from a global conflict. The Palomares B-52 crash 1966. In January 1966, a US B-52 bomber collided with a tanker plane during mid-air refueling over Palomares, Spain. The bomber was carrying 4 hydrogen bombs. 2 bombs hit the ground at high speed, and their conventional explosives detonated, scattering radioactive plutonium over a wide area. A 3rd bomb landed in a riverbed, and the 4th fell into the Mediterranean Sea. It took the U.S. Navy 80 days to find the missing nuclear bomb in the ocean. While no nuclear explosion occurred, the incident caused a massive radioactive cleanup operation and showed how easily nuclear weapons could be lost. The 1983 Able Archer exercise. In November 1983, NATO conducted a military exercise called Able Archer 83. It was a simulation of a nuclear conflict. However, the Soviet leadership was so paranoid that they believed the exercise was a cover for a real first strike by the West. The Soviets placed their nuclear forces on high alert and fueled their missiles. The West was unaware that the Soviets were taking the exercise seriously. Only when intelligence reports reached the U.S. did they realize how close they had come to accidentally starting a war. This incident led to a significant change in how the U.S. communicated with the USSR. The Tybee Island Lost Bomb, 1958. During a training mission off the coast of Georgia, a B-47 bomber collided with another aircraft. To save the crew during an emergency landing, the pilot was forced to jettison a 7,600-pound Mark 15 nuclear bomb into the waters of Wassaw Sound. Despite months of searching, the bomb was never found. It remains buried somewhere in the silt and mud of the ocean floor today. While the Air Force says the bomb is safe as long as it isn't disturbed, it is a chilling reminder of a lost nuclear weapon sitting just miles from a major U.S. city. The Thule Air Base crash 1968. A B-52 bomber carrying 4 hydrogen bombs caught fire over Greenland. The crew was forced to bail out, and the plane crashed into the sea ice near Thule Air Base. The impact detonated the conventional explosives in the bombs, breaking them apart and spreading radioactive material across the ice. A massive cleanup operation called Project Crested Ice was launched in freezing temperatures. Thousands of tons of contaminated ice and snow had to be removed. One of the bomb cores was reportedly never recovered, believed to have sunk through the melting ice into the seabed. Subscribe and like this video.